Hello, it's Roger Lanctot, Director of Automotive Connected Mobility at Strategy Analytics, here at the Aquarium at MovinOn with David Strickland from Venable. And David's involved in quite a number of transportation-related initiatives and safety-related initiatives, more importantly. So if you could, David, can you review, as you did just before we stepped in here, what it is you're actually working on right now, and help me with your actual title?
Oh, sure, absolutely. Well, Roger, thank you so much for having me. As I said before, I'm a partner at the law firm of Venable in Washington, D.C. But in terms of self-driving work, I am the counsel for the Self-Driving Coalition for Safer Streets, which is a coalition which includes Waymo, which is formerly the Google car self-driving project, Uber, Lyft, Ford Motor Company, and Volvo Cars. And the coalition really is focused on how we can get highly automated vehicles level 4 SCE, which is where the vehicle drives itself with no expectation of the driver ever having to take over the task, but in limited scenarios, limited spaces, such as a certain geographic limitation or area or weather. It can only operate, it can't operate in fog or snow or something like that, all the way up to level 5, which is full control by the vehicle to maintain the driving task at all times with, no boundary of conditions, so they can operate all weather, all geography, all the time. I have two other side gigs in my spare time. I'm the national board chair for Mothers Against Drunk Driving, which actually feeds very much into my day job about the power of self-driving, what it can do for safety. And I'm also the board chair for Safe Kids Worldwide, which is the organization which helps the federal government run the car seat program. They are the actual contractor that manages all the training of the car seat installs and things of that nature. So I'm all over the place in transportation and safety.
Well, and speaking of being all over the place, your background is in, among other things, cybersecurity law, as
Yes.
well as at the US DOT in a
Yes.
senior role. And so that puts you in a very qualified position in working with the Self-Driving Coalition to determine who's going to call the shots for self-driving cars. So I think there's a little bit of a tussle between states, cities, the federal government, and the car makers apparently have some ideas about this. How is this sort of playing out? Is there any sort of congruence or agreement?
I don't think it's necessarily a tussle. It's more that there's areas of void that I think that, frankly, people that care about their constituencies want to make sure are covered. The federal government has leaned in hard into self-driving. They issued guidance last spring regarding the federal automated vehicle policy, which talks about,
Well, by the way, it was interesting because the Obama administration was a little bit embarrassed when they went to the meeting in Europe, and the U.S. didn't have a position.
That is a part of it, but it is also, too, it's how do you, and this is more regulatory bureaucracy speak. I've forgotten, before I came into private practice, I was the head of auto safety for the Obama administration from 2010 to 2014, so I can speak well about the regulatory challenges that you have. The agency that's responsible for auto safety in the United States, the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration, they issue regulations based upon years and years of data, really learning about what's effective, what's not, what's the cost, how's it implemented, are there any unintended consequences.
Isn't the core challenge, though, they've gone about as far as they can go in terms of helping people survive crashes? The challenge now is proving a negative, that a technology has prevented a crash.
That's absolutely right. And, crash avoidance is the North Star, how to make sure the crash never happens. But once again, as you said, Roger, proving a negative is hard. And also the other part of this equation is showing effectiveness of that, and ultimately it's very expensive. And how do you sort of justify that? So NHTSA, in talking about self-driving, they're not ready to issue a regulation saying these are the standards that you must meet in order to be a self-driving car that's legal on the American roads in terms of safety standards. They're going to need years to do that. So they issued this guidance so that they do have something to fill the void, not only sort of being in response to the world community, but being responsive to realizing that this technology is on the road today.
This is what we call the light regulatory touch?
Yes, it is. It's very light, but it does have an impact, because this is where the joys of regulation and liability intersect. while guidance is voluntary, the manufacturers and the Silicon Valley companies could choose to follow it or could choose to ignore it, and they have no liability in terms of the federal government. But what happens is, from a liability standpoint, if you have guidance that the federal government has issued on how you should test and what you should do, and you choose not to follow it, and your self-driving vehicle is involved in a crash, that's going to be the first thing that a trial lawyer or a class action lawyer will point to as a fact of that you're careless or negligent. So in ways, guidance, while it is light regulatory, actually does change the standard of care, which is the reason why guidance in the United States is issued by the government is so effective, and it's happened in a number of cases.
Now, what's your professional opinion of this assertion that one hears all the time, that we need a uniform approach so the states don't go in all their different directions? The reason I'm asking is I live in Virginia. Terry McAuliffe's saying, hey, guys, come on down. Talk about light regulatory touch. We have no regulatory touch. Bring your cars in and test them. So, I mean, is it better to have states competing, or is that a nightmare?
It's better to have states competing in some areas. What you want to make sure is that in terms of a pathway to deployment, that you have this virtually uniform regulations as we do today. Being able to drive a car, your regular old car, whatever you drive every day, you can get in your car in Virginia and drive to California. You don't have to worry about any changes of laws or impediments regarding you driving. Versus now with a self-driving car, you have to change the plates at the Nevada-California border if you want to take a self-driving car between those two states. That's what we want to eliminate. But the competition between the states is good. And the reason why is frankly how vehicle technologies develop today. When you think about crash imminent braking, or lane keep assist, or going back to even electronic stability control, or even anti-lock braking systems, those will, aside from a mandate for electronic stability control that's existed since 2012, none of these things have standards. But how do they come to be? Because they were developed and they were tested on public roads thoughtfully by very careful corporations that had good risk assessment models, and recognizing that the unintended consequences of creating more risk on the roads is very bad. But the benefits were, we have technologies that are working today that save people's lives. And so you don't want to get in the way of that virtuous process. And that's the reason why I think everybody's saying that having states like the Commonwealth of Virginia, which I am also a resident, saying that we want to be a leader, we want to be a test bed, we have the intellectual capabilities, with Virginia Tech and the University of Virginia, and we believe that we have the right mix of roadways and challenges for your vehicles, that we're investing heavily because we believe this is the future. We want the Commonwealth to benefit from that. Texas is saying the same thing. California is is a little schizophrenic about it. Michigan is very deeply invested in the United States. So that type of competition is good. But what you want to make sure is that with competition, you don't throw away the notion of safety. That you want to make sure that you're not increasing risk on the roads, that everybody that is coming in and testing is, properly capitalized so that they're financially responsible for a crash that they may cause.
Okay.
And all those kinds of things.
Perfect transition to my next question, which is, now you mentioned Michigan. Now initially they went along with GM's request that
Right.
Only car makers be allowed to do so, which speaks to the point you just made about liability and the ability to stand behind and respond to a situation that might require some financial resources. But your organization is definitely in direct clash with GM at this point. Is there any indication that they might sort of back off that position, that only a car maker can pursue this?
We've been working very hard in the States because it's called the SAVE Act, which GM is pushing. And we hope we'll be sitting down with General Motors, and while we have differences of opinion upon that particular provision, we understand its intent. You don't want to have a new entrant that is improperly capitalized and that doesn't have a proper risk assessment to increase risk on the roads. You don't want, three guys that just got graduated from college decided to build a bolt-on self-driving system in their garage and start testing it on the street. Or you don't want a foreign new entrant.
Speaking of which, what did happen with George Hotz? Because he backed off very quickly when NHTSA just sent him a
Oh,
letter
the comma.ai?
asking him for a little information.
Well, I mean, which is exactly the point. You want to basically have those players, and basically what NHTSA asked for was actually a normal information request for anybody that's doing these types of testing. And he made a decision that he didn't want to comport with, frankly, what everybody else does in terms of working with the agency in terms of basic safety protocols. You want to flush those kind of people out of the market. And actually, comma.ai is, frankly, how the system should work, that you don't need this new regulatory regime, that the agency has the powers to do what it needs to do to get bad actors out of the market. I think that's a perfect example.
But he literally could still be in operation if he just had responded.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I mean, it's just your choice. But I mean, I think, but circling back to, with the states, is making sure that all of these firms, whether they are a new entrant, of a type that is thoughtful, proper risk assessment, well capitalized, Google/Waymo is a classic example. They should compete. And, yes, they are one of the members of my coalition. But even if they're not, I mean, if you have a firm that frankly has the ability and the responsibility to interact with the regulatory powers at every level and be thoughtful about it, they should compete. Now, I fully appreciate you want to get rid of that risk of third world country, new entrant, new vehicle, all that kind of stuff to happen. You don't want that creating risk. But you don't want to squelch competition either. At the end of the day, Lyft, Uber, Waymo as examples. There's other startups, all the way from, around the country that are thoughtfully constructed in terms of their business operations, are well capitalized, they can be financially responsible, and they should compete. Frankly, that competition is a good thing.
So let's take a look at it globally. So
sure.
How are the priorities of different I mean, I look at the U.S. You have states probably want certain things. States, cities probably have some things that they want, and then the federal government. What about globally? What are different regions of the world? I suspect they all have different expectations.
There is, and I think that's forming. UNECE and Working Party 29 are trying to work on technical standards for active safety and ultimately self-driving. Clearly, the Japanese manufacturers and Japan is working on particular models in terms of, whether you're talking about Toyotas, basically, pilot assist kind of operations, things of that nature. The Europeans have a very different sort of model. Chinese are very lenient, and they all sort of have different variations on a theme because ultimately it's a combination of that innovation cycle that you want to be a part of, and more specifically, if you are the world leader in what is ultimately going to be the transformation of individual mobility, you have built your arc to, frankly, the future in terms of how you manage and sell vehicles around the world. So it's a high-stakes game. I mean, the outcome benefits us all. How do we make society safer? And that's something we should all want. But, let's not fool ourselves. Every country, every region on the planet is leaning into this very hard because they do see this is where the future is leading, and they want to be a part of it.
I think of it a little bit like wireless. So some countries had difficulty building out their wired infrastructure, so they went right to cellular.
Exactly.
Is there a possibility of an emerging market leaping directly to automated vehicles?
I mean, I would probably think that probably, like let's take Singapore as an example. There's probably, smaller city-states that could, lean in resources and, force, the citizenry to a self-driving environment, and that could definitely happen. When you're thinking about a larger country, whether, from the United States down, there's going to be this transition because you're going to have this arc once again of the legacy fleet that's going to be around for at least 30 to 40 years whenever you actually have full introduction anyway. So it's going to be, you probably will see in some areas around the world where you do, like Singapore once again, that they could absolutely say, this is where we're going. We're eliminating congestion. We're going to move to, say, a hybridized or full electric fleet. We're going to make this so that, we're going to congestion price the centers of the cities, and we're going to make everybody use self-driving vehicles and take the risk off our roads. And they could do it.
And are people going to buy these cars? There seems to be a lot of confusion about this point.
Or
are they just going to use them?
No, you see, that's the interesting question. question. And I think the reason why you're seeing firms around the world combining or partnering, because nobody knows what the business model is ultimately going to be for these vehicles. Are you still going to see individual car ownership? There's probably, as somebody told me once when I was having this sort of same conversation, they're like, you're going to mean to tell me that, a farmer in Helena is going to give up his Ford F-250. Yeah, good point.
Unlikely.
Yeah, good point. But you're going to also have people in the major urban areas, so you're going to see mixed usage. Ultimately, what I see is probably a universe where, in the United States, I can't speak for other regions with as much specificity, but in the United States, you will see, probably the shift of, in the major high densely populated cities, there being probably a much higher usage of self-driving in terms of, taxis and getting around the cities and not having to worry about parking, things of that nature. You're going to see some individual car ownership still exist because of people that live in exurbs and they want probably some, ability to control their own ability to have access to a car. And then you probably will have the further extremes, which like out in probably rural areas where we're probably not going to see as much penetration. So you'll see a mixed market in the United States, I think, for a very long time.
Which leads to my final question.
Yes.
When am I going to walk down the driveway in my suburban home and see a self-driving vehicle go scooting by?
You see, everybody wants to play the win game. I would probably say you're going to see the technology in limited deployment in the next 5 years easily. And I think when you're talking about walking into a showroom and buying a self-driving vehicle that could, say, have capability, you could drive it yourself or it could go into full self-driving mode, that's probably within another 15 to 20 years, I think, where you can go to the end of your driveway, there's your vehicle, or the model where you buy a service where you can pick any vehicle you want, you order it, it comes to you and you use it, and then you have you can, about to say if it's a Ford, 150 to do your errands, and then you can, about to say you can get a Focus if you go city driving. That model we'll probably see in that same time period.
Oh, I'm going to sneak one more in, I'm sorry.
Please.
Your feelings about level 3, driver ready to take control.
There's issues in human-machine interface, which I think a number of manufacturers are working to fix. Level 3 should exist in the marketplace. The question ultimately is going to be doing it safely. And I think my members of my coalition made the decision that, from an engineering and standpoint for them, they just rather go to level 4 or level 5 and not worry about hand back. There's some manufacturers that are investing heavily in level 3, and they have a way of executing. Some of them even talking about, as opposed to handing back to the person in the cabin, you hand back to like an air traffic controller. So it still creates this level 4-ish experience, but you're still handing back. I think level 3 needs to be a part of that.
Nissan was talking about that.
Exactly right.
Maybe that's what that NASA engineer went over there is involved in. Well, David Strickland, partner at Venable, thank you very much for insights here at the Aquarium at MovinOn, and enjoy the event.
Thank you very much, Roger.